Greetings all, Ferrari Man 601 here. Welcome back to another 1/18th scale model car review of this, the 1990 Ferrari 641 as driven by Alain Prost in the 1990 Formula One season. This car brought to us by Exoto. Yes, those of you who are model car collectors, undoubtedly you know all about Exoto and how spectacular their products are, and of course how spectacularly rare a lot of their products are. This one is no exception to that general rule. Let's take a look at this. Ferrari 641, driven by Nigel Mansell and Alain Prost for the 1990 World Championship. It will be remembered, and it already is remembered, as one of the more technically innovative and exploratory cars that we have seen throughout the entire history of Formula One. Those of you who know what this car is will also know about its immediate predecessor, the 640 of 1989, also sometimes called the F189. Well, that car was the first one ever to enter a Formula One Grand Prix with a semi-automatic gearbox. Yes, the technology that Formula One has today and that we have been seeing since 1989, at least on the Ferraris. The other teams, of course, did come to copy the idea soon thereafter, but the semi-automatic paddle-actuated gearbox, hydraulically or pneumatically or electronically shifted in terms of how the gears are actually slotted in with each other, it debuted in 1989 with this car's immediate predecessor, the 640. A little bit of a historical nugget for you, though. The 640 of 1989 was not the first Formula One car ever to run with a semi-automatic gearbox. In fact, Ferrari themselves came up with a semi-automatic paddle-shifted solution all the way back in 1979. I found this on an Italian blog site. I'll put a link to it in the description if you'd like to take a look at it for yourself. But this source alleges that in the winter of 1979, this device, the semi-automatic gearbox, was mounted in a Ferrari 312 T3 Evolution, the T3 Evo, so that it could be tested at Fiorano with Gilles Villeneuve. The system only weighed 2 kilograms more than the traditional mechanical manual H-pattern gearbox. Gilles Villeneuve completed about 100 laps of Fiorano with that semi-automatic gearbox in 1979. However, he did not like it. Therefore, the manual H-pattern gearbox remained on the Ferraris and all other Formula One cars until 1989, when Ferrari finally reintroduced the concept for race use in the 640 of that year. And of course, they carried that over into 1990 with this, the 641. Interesting little historical nugget there. Some of you may say that that's just impossible. There's no way that they had that in 1979. Well, this testimony is coming from none other than the legendary Ferrari designer and team manager Mauro Forghieri. So, there is the provenance of my information there. But, aside from all of that, returning to this car that we see before us here, the 641. This, of course, was the car that Ferrari fielded in 1990 with Alain Prost and Nigel Mansell. It is quite similar in terms of its overall construction and overall design to the cars that we still see today. We have a Kevlar and carbon fiber chassis and monocoque there, replete with the cockpit and the driver's safety cell. We have double wishbone push rod front and rear suspension, and as we've mentioned, we have a 7-speed semi-automatic paddle shift gearbox. Of course, all of this designed by Ferrari. Also, as we see on modern cars, we're running on slick tires, brought to you by Goodyear here, unlike Pirelli in the modern era. But slick tires, you can see that we have a reasonably long wheelbase here. That's because these cars, just like the modern ones, did not refuel during the course of the Grand Prix. However, where we do see a little bit of a departure in terms of present versus past, this car is powered by a 3.5-liter V12, normally aspirated as the Ferrari Tipo 036. It's a 3.5-liter displacement V12 with a 65-degree bank angle, longitudinally mounted, of course, driving that 7-speed semi-automatic gearbox. So, really, this car is a very interesting paradox when you try to look at it in modern context. We have got a lot of the technology that we still see on modern Formula One cars in terms of its technology and its construction, but we also have some pretty big departures. We have a normally aspirated versus a turbocharged engine, and we have 6 more cylinders than the Formula One V6 engines of 2019. Putting all of that aside, though, Out of 16 races in which this car participated, it managed to win 6 of them. It took pole position for 3 of them and set fastest lap in 5 of them. However, those results were not quite good enough to compete for the World Championship. 1990, of course, the big season finale at Suzuka was not really the season finale, but it was the climax of the championship. Ayrton Senna on pole, Alain Prost right next to him. Pole position had been moved from the clean to the dirty side of the grid by one Jean-Marie Balestre, who of course did not like Ayrton Senna very much, and of course, being French, he wanted to favor Alain Prost as much as possible, something that Balestre later admitted to doing later on in his life. Be that as it may, Prost got a better start, being on the clean side of the grid. Senna slotted in behind, and then immediately into turn 1, Senna rammed Prost up the back, destroyed the rear end of the Ferrari, destroyed the front end of the McLaren MP45B, and thus decided the 1990 World Drivers' Championship in the favor of Ayrton Senna. There it was. Probably one of the most legendary, most famous, most replayed moments in all of Formula One history, and this car was one of the protagonists therein. The provenance of this model, then, in terms of having it in your 1/18th scale collection, it's not lost upon anybody who even knows an infinitesimal amount of motorsport history. If you're going to be collecting these models, if you can get one, get this one, because that story alone is worth it, but there is a whole lot more worth it in terms of owning this model, and we're definitely going to be taking a look at that moving forward. If I may begin by stating the obvious, just look at the shapes, look at the shut lines, look at the colors. Just look at the overall proportions of this car, this beautiful shape, this beautiful form penned by Enrique Scalabrone and Steve Nichols. Absolutely timeless is this shape, and in fact this car became such a trendsetter that Formula One cars, even today in 2019, still follow this same general plan. Taking a look at the car from above here, you can see the overall proportion, you can see the overall shape. That is the Coke bottle shape that we all talk about when we take a look at how the teams have got their bodywork situated and where they've got all the cuts in the floor area to try and ram more air through the diffuser. Just take a look at what Ferrari did all the way back in 1990, and even more so in 1989 when this car's predecessor came out. This car very much an evolution of the 640 of 1989, but just take a look at what they're doing back there. When we take a look at modern Formula One cars and we talk about the way that the designers are trying to maximize the amount of free floor space that they have ahead of the rear tires to start to feed the diffuser, well, look at what they're doing here. They have all kinds of space to play with heading toward that rear zone of the car. It's absolutely spectacular to look at this car and then remember that it's 30 years old, and you can still look at some details on it and it looks quite modern in many respects. That is something that is truly remarkable, and it's something that is so indicative of how innovative this design was in its day. This car, in 1989 and 1990, it was considered to be very much experimental, that gearbox technology alone. Nobody had really tried it before, and nobody had ever tried it during a Grand Prix weekend before, but Ferrari, they were quite confident in it, and of course, here in 1990, the second year for that semi-automatic gearbox, they really started to work out the teething problems that they had in 1989, and they were able to challenge for the championship all the way up to the Suzuka round of the season, and again, the championship probably would have gone farther into the season had Senna not crashed in to Alain Prost, but be that as it may, the fact that they were really able to take what was an experiment and then be competitive with it for the balance of 1990 is really spectacular, and it really is a testament to just how much Ferrari were trying to push the envelope, push the limits in terms of what they could achieve, and they managed to achieve quite a lot in 1990 with this car. And then of course their fortunes would start to turn in 1991 and 1992, and let's not talk about 93 through 97 so much, but really the amount of innovation that was going on in this era of Formula One, it was setting the standard for what we see today 30 years later. So just think about that. Even when you're looking at an older race, looking at older cars and thinking, wow, they look so slow or they look so crude and primitive compared to what we have today. Back in these days, this was when the current complexion of Formula One was actually being hashed out and finalized. So again, look at cars like these not in the context of the modern era when it comes to performance, but look at them in the context of the overall contributions that they made and their designers made in terms of turning Formula One into the spectacle that it now is. In terms of the model for a model's sake, well, there is a lot to see on this car. Let's get right into it. This is, of course, 1/18 scale by Exoto. Now, these cars were in production in 2000, so the model itself is almost 20 years old at this point. Be that as it may, it is absolutely spectacular. I was able to find this one from a private seller on eBay. They've long been out of production. I remember looking for model cars when I was a teenager. I had just really started to get into the hobby, and I saw these on the Exoto website, and I saw them on the websites of some other private sellers or dealers as well in those days, talking early 2000s here. And I just looked at these cars, particularly this one, and I saw it's a Ferrari, it's a V12 Ferrari, it's absolutely beautiful. And then I saw the price tag of about $3,000 US. And I told myself, there is no way that I will ever get my hands on one of these, because at the time I was maybe 12, 13 years old. Of course, you're still in grade school. You don't even have the faintest concept of what a job looks like yet. And of course, being in the model car hobby for a little while by that point, I understood that cars like these were minimal in terms of the numbers that they produced. They were limited production runs. By the time I'd ever be able to afford something like this, to spend $3,000 on a model car, there's no way I would ever find one. But a couple of weeks ago, I saw a listing on eBay from a seller out in Pennsylvania who had this car, and obviously, as you can see, it is in absolutely mint perfect condition with the box, with the documentation, with everything. It really has never been displayed as far as I can tell. It's barely been touched in all of that intervening time. I got it in total with shipping for about $375 US, so well below the MSRP in the year 2000 of $3,000, but definitely still an expensive purchase, but it is well worth it. But also because I remember how rare these things were and how exclusive these things were back when they were produced, I am keenly aware that many of you watching this video will also have had the ennui that I had as a teenager, looking at these and understanding that the chances of me ever getting one were going to be slim to none. Therefore, I want to do a good job with this one and just be as thorough as I can in showing you the detailing on the car. We're going to take the bodywork off, take a look at everything in the cockpit, the engine, all of that, and really just do it justice, because this is a piece that doesn't come along very often. Again, if you happen to get lucky and see one in a private sale for a reasonable price and it's in good condition, such as this one, jump on it, because you'll never find another one again. Believe me. So, again, I want to do it justice. I want to do a good job of showing this one to you because it is rare, and I know that all of you would absolutely kill to have one. So, again, I just want to do it justice for all of you. So, let's begin just by taking a look exteriorly at what we have going on. We've been seeing it spinning around here. You can tell that we have got absolutely beautiful bodywork on this car. We have wonderful paint. It is many layers thick, I am led to believe. It's very reflective. It has a mirror-like finish on it. It's absolutely spectacular, absolutely sublime. I can find no faults in the paint application. Little speckles that you can see there. That's not a flaw in the paint. That's actually just a little bit of dust that has fallen onto the model as I've had it here, just spinning around for the last hour or so I've had it out. But it's absolutely spectacular in every sense of the word. The bodywork alone is absolutely spectacular to behold. Looking at the other details here on the car, the tires, the wheels, the suspension elements, the ductwork, the radiator matrices inside there. We'll take a better look at them once we get the car opened up. There's our rear suspension, double wishbone push rod, the rain light, the gearbox casing, the rear brakes you can see in there, the front brakes as they spin around here. There's the caliper. How about all of that? The carbon detailing on the front wing, the nose tip with the Ferrari logo, the carbon look there on the end fences there of the front wing. There is so much to see here, and I invite you to pause the video at any point. Hopefully we'll get some very clear freeze frames on these, rendering this at the highest resolution I reasonably can. And it's absolutely perfect in every sense. Taking a look here at the top side of the car. You see the back side of the cockpit there? There's that little cushion just to keep the driver's head from smacking the back of the monocoque. That's actually fabric coated. It seems to be a hard plastic little bezel back there, but it's coated with fabric, almost a faux satin type finish. You can see here on the air snorkel area we have full Marlboro branding on this car. It's actually the first model that I have that has tobacco sponsorship on it, plain as day. Alain Prost's name there, and of course Fiat on the back of this car. This is before Ferrari really opened up their partnership with Philip Morris, and they started to put big Marlboro lettering all across the engine cover. So not too much in the way of sponsorship decals here. You can see some auxiliary sponsors here, Manin Morelli, Weber, and all of that stuff down the 3/4 side of the car through the Coke bottle section. You can see our fuel company, and then of course the big Ferrari Scudetto shield there. All of those decals are perfectly rendered. Nothing looks out of place. Nothing is smudged. Nothing is crooked. It is all absolutely perfect. The numbering, the lettering, the Goodyear lettering on the tires, it's all clear and it's all there and it's all absolutely fantastic to behold. We'll wait for the car to spin around a little bit and we'll stop the rotation and we'll give you a sense of what the cockpit looks like. There's going to be a loud beep. Be ready for it. Now... All right, so we've stopped the rotation there, and we'll take a look into the cockpit. There it is, the 641 cockpit, very highly digital in terms of the displays that we've got there. That would have been a big LCD on the center of the dashboard there. We're replacing actual analog gauges, as you can see. So you'd have your multi-page display. Those of you who have driven the assorted 641, 642, 640 mods available in sim racing, be it Assetto Corsa or R Factor or whatever else that they might be out there for, you'll know that that display has 2 pages, one for lower revs and one for higher revs. It switches automatically. There it is. There's your steering wheel, which actually, it's difficult to divine this detail here on camera, but the steering wheel is actually lined with a suede-like fabric. And then on the back you can see just a hint of the paddle shifters. Perhaps if we get around this side a little bit, if we can get it into focus, you can see a little bit better. We'll take the bodywork off later on, and of course you'll see all of that as well. But the side of the cockpit, there we are. You can see that we have got ourselves FIA homologation stickers. Once we focus, there we go. Homologation stickers, the Ferrari chassis plate on that side, on the left-hand side of the bulkhead. On the right-hand side, there's a lever. Obviously, that's not a gear lever. That is actually an anti-roll bar adjustment. I believe that would have been for the rear anti-roll bar there for the driver's right hand to actuate. But it's great. Obviously, full carbon binnacle in the car. And then you've got some switches up there to engage reverse. You've also got switches up there to discharge the fire bottle, and probably some radio adjustments also available to the driver from the cockpit in there. Looking at the seat, there's the seat. You can see that the seat is also lined with a suede type fabric. It's almost an Alcantara type fabric. We have actual fabric seat belts with photo etched buckles in there. Center hub there, and then you can see the shoulder straps, the leg straps, and then the lower straps there. It's all there, and it's all in fabric, and it's all absolutely size correct. It's scale correct. It's really highly detailed, and of course the whole cockpit is finished in that carbon look finish. It's probably not easy to see on camera, but it's all there, and it all looks absolutely correct. It's glorious. In addition to the cockpit details, you can see the wing mirrors here, absolutely minuscule, but there they are in their correct positions with some little reflective tape in there to represent the mirror glass. Again, it's absolutely sublime in terms of the details as you've got going on in here. But of course, the real part of the show is under the skin, and we have quite the impressive skin on this car, as we have already seen. But of course, we have got to take it off. So in order to do that, there are no clamps or latches or anything that engage when you put it on. So you just grab it at the strategically located exhaust outlets for the radiators here, and you lift. And once you do, behold what lies beneath. Yes, there is the 3.5 liter, normally aspirated V12 engine in the back of this thing, producing about 700 to 750-ish horsepower. Again, exact power figures not exactly easy to come by. But there it is, and of course, this being an Exoto model, there are tons of details to be seen under the bodywork there. First of all, we've got these absolutely minuscule spark plug wires going into all 6 cylinders on the right-hand bank, and then of course there are another 6 cylinders in the left-hand bank out of shot now. Below that you can see the exhaust primaries coming out of the engine. This is not a plate casting, nor is this plastic. This is individually modeled pipes, and they're actual pipes. They're made out of aluminum, I'm led to believe. So we have noble materials being used in a lot of the places on this car. Of course, the exhaust outlets, the primary pipes, they would have been Inconel. I'm not expecting Exoto to be using Inconel in a model car, but aluminum, it's close enough. And of course, you can see the effect that all of that has. It looks absolutely fantastic. Great scattering of the light. Looks very diffuse, as you would expect a metallic reflection to look, because it is actual metal. Very cool. On the back of the engine here, there is our auxiliary oil tank. That's where you'd be filling the oil up into the engine. And then of course you've got oil lines to supply the valve covers there to lubricate the valve train. Over here, this is probably a coolant reservoir going forward to the aforementioned radiators. You can see it much better here in this view. We actually have a radiator matrix there. You can see the corrugations there in the radiator. It's not just a sticker or something like that. That is an actual metal radiator going in there. And you can see the ducting on the extreme outboard side, the right side of the radiator, and that's exiting right here through that outlet. So there it is. Very cool. Moving rearward, here is the rear suspension and the top of the gearbox casing. You can see the mess of hydraulic lines going into this manifold on top here to control the gearbox. Again, that is that semi-automatic 7-speed gearbox that was so new and so revolutionary in this era. All of that's been modeled. In addition, we have the rear suspension here, the shocks here, the struts, the bell cranks going down to the push rods, and then of course the upper and lower wishbones on the rear suspension proper. You can see all the mounting points for the push rods, and of course the upper wishbones there, all screwed in with actual screws on both sides. Very, very cool. Additionally, you've got the half shafts coming out of the gearbox to the rear axle. Brilliant. Absolutely marvelous detail going on with this car. With everything removed, it is a completely different kettle of fish. All of the clean, uninterrupted body lines have been replaced with an absolute flurry of visual stimulation. And yeah, that's what you get when you get an Exoto model. This little metallic strut, which is going through from the top of the valve cover here, that's actually the throttle cable. It passes into the monocoque through the side of the fuel tank there. It has its own little rubber grommet that it's passing through. It's absolutely astounding detail on this. But pulling back a little bit, you can see that we have more or less the same overall design that we have seen in Formula One since this time, and even before this time. We've got ourselves the cockpit behind the front axle. We've got the seat, the fuel tank, and then behind the fuel tank is mounted the engine, and then the engine mounted directly to the gearbox, and then the rear suspension mounted directly to the gearbox. So this is the same overall macrocosmic basic plan that Formula One cars still follow to this day. Additionally here, we have another detail. We can remove our intake snorkel from the top of the V12. We can set it aside, and then we can take another look at the top side of the engine. There we go. All 6 intake trumpets per side, 12 in total. It is fantastic. Of course, on the real engine, you'd have your throttle bodies in here. There would be 12 individual throttle bodies across the top of the engine here, one for each cylinder, quite obviously. We don't have quite that amount of detail rendered in here, but I don't think you can quite blame them, because what does exist here is absolutely fantastic, nothing short of miraculous as far as I'm concerned. It really is tremendously detailed, tremendously well executed on the part of Exoto. To the sides here, there are the exhaust primaries on the left bank, and you can also see this area of highly reflective bodywork. This is actually a very thin sheet of aluminum that's placed down there in the engine bay to emulate the heat shielding and the heat reflection that would have been placed there to protect the very delicate and temperature-sensitive carbon bodywork on the side of the car. So again, more attention to detail brought to you by Exoto. Getting the car rotating again, we can get a more of a panoramic view of the car with all the bodywork removed. There's the valve cover on the other side with all those little spark plug wires. The amount of detail, again, inside and out, is absolutely phenomenal. There's the roll bar on top of the fuel tank. Obviously that one would need to withstand the whole weight of the car should it become inverted. There's more heat shielding on the back of the fuel tank just to keep the fuel cool enough so that we don't get a fire situation inside the tank. There's the side of the fuel tank itself, the back of the seat there, and then decals even on the bottom of the roll structure itself now that we have the bodywork removed and we can see all of it. There's the breather for the fuel tank, also probably doubles as a filler valve for refueling in the pits. And of course on the back side of the fuel tank, the lower side, you have different fluid reservoirs. This is probably for water or other types of coolant that they might have been using to keep everything under normal operating temperatures here. And then just taking a look at the back, again, there's that huge engine. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. One of the things though that does come to your attention when you look at this car, especially in a modern light, is when we take a look at the car from above, you can see that we have, yes, very similar type of packaging in terms of where the components are being placed, but what lacks is the economy of space. Nowadays, when we look at the bodywork on a modern Formula One car, what we see is shrink wrap, complete and utter shrink wrap. There is no extra space between the bodywork and the components that they're covering inside the car. Not quite the case here. Yes, we do have that very tight Coke bottle section here at the rear of this car, but as you can see, there is quite a bit of empty space around the exhaust primaries, for example, a little bit of empty space around the gearbox casing as well. This, of course, doesn't mean that Ferrari didn't know the dimensions of the bodywork before they put the engine in. What it means is they're concerned about cooling. They want to keep that carbon bodywork as cool as they possibly can so that they don't start to burn away at it once the exhausts really start to come up to temperature. And remember, on these cars, when the exhausts do come up to full temperature, they're nearly translucent. They're so hot. The metal becomes incandescent. So there's a lot of heat going on. And obviously carbon composites don't exactly have the best heat tolerances, so they want to make sure they can get some air through there. So a little bit of bypass flow from the radiators would serve just to cool the bodywork down because, well, there's a lot of heat that we have to manage. But also, taking a look at the car with the bodywork off, there's the rear zone going by. Underneath, diffuser, of course, would be back there. The exhaust outlets as well. There's our bodywork removed. And then the front end, don't want to neglect it too much. Unlike the Williams FW14B, that Exoto model that I've shown you a couple of years ago, this car does not have active suspension. The FW14B really perfected the active suspension concept in Formula One. So this car, with a conventional pushrod passive suspension, so mechanical suspension, the front axle here with the bell cranks and the push rods and the dampers, basically just as we have seen in the rear. The rear ones are a little bit beefier simply because there's more weight back there and more damping needs to happen, but that detail on the front axle as well, very cool. And you can also see a little bit better into the cockpit now that we've got less obstructions. Again, the amount of detailing that Exoto have put in here is absolutely immense. And there we go. There are the paddles on the back of the steering wheel. Couldn't quite see that before, but there they are. They are replicated. It is brilliant to see. It's so good. There's so much stuff to see on this model, and it's really, it's a privilege to have something like this, I must say. In terms of what you get with the model, this one, in terms of the other features that it does not have removable wheels. That's something that the Williams FW14B, the Exoto model, that one has removable wheels. This one does not. But honestly, I don't think it's really that much of a detractor from what you get with this one, because the detail on it is so great otherwise. And really, removing the wheels on something like these, the wheel nuts are only a couple millimeters across, and it's so finicky to work with them. It would be so easy across thread one, so it's not really something that I look for, even in an expensive model like this. So it's a feature that I can do without, and I'm quite happily doing without it on this, because there's just so much more to see otherwise. There's the rear rain light. We'll get the car to rotate around again, because there are a couple details that I want to show you there on the rear end. But that's the overall proportion with all of the bodywork removed. It's fantastic. Really, it is quite brilliant. We'll spin it around a little bit more. We'll stop and take a look at the rear end. Right about there. Beep. There we go. All right. So, rear end on this thing. Just a couple things to point out. Of course, you have our rear rain light there. If it'll focus in, probably not. Yeah, there's our rear rain light. As you can see, get that to focus, there we are. So the rain light has an actual lens on it. It's not a sticker, it's an actual plastic element, translucent. You get the light going in there, brilliant. Down here, that little circular area, that's actually the starter hole. So that's where the starter motor would go into the back of the gearbox to turn the engine over. Below here, this gold area, that's the jack post. So in the pit stop, the rear jack would slot into that little hooked section. They'd be able to raise the car up off the ground and then do a tire change, and only a tire change, remember. Also down here in the diffuser, don't know if the exposure is going to show it very well, but you can see the exhaust outlets. Blown diffusers in this era, a lot of people, newer fans, younger fans, they might think that exhaust blown diffusers were invented by Red Bull in 2011. No, they were merely revived by Red Bull in 2011. Here's a car in 1990 with an exhaust blown diffuser. The only thing the Red Bulls did in 2011 and thereafter was blowing the diffuser off throttle. In this era, they didn't have nearly as sophisticated software for engine mapping and things like that. In fact, this car still has a traditional throttle cable. So the exhaust was only flowing through the diffuser at max pressure at max throttle. So in other words, full throttle through high-speed corners. If you had to bleed off of the gas, if you got understeer setting in, or you needed to make other corrections in terms of driving, you would also lose rear downforce. So it could make these cars a little bit temperamental and a little bit twitchy in high-speed corners. So drivers had to have a lot of commitment in this era. And of course, if you look at the cars up and down the grid, almost all of them had the exhausts exiting through the diffuser there. So at this point, exhaust-blown diffusers were pretty much the du jour solution in terms of where to put the exhaust on a Formula One car. It wasn't until really 1998 at the Spanish Grand Prix, I believe it was, that Ferrari actually debuted the periscope exhaust. Those are the top side exhausts that were blowing the beam wing. This is the beam wing on this car, the secondary element there. That was a Ferrari innovation that came 8 years later relative to this car, but in this era, still exhaust-blown diffusers coming out the bottom of the diffuser there, as you can see. Very cool stuff. Really, in terms of the detailing on this car, there is just so much to see, and it's so faithfully done. There's no criticism at all in terms of a modeling standpoint, anything that could be better, anything that was done incorrectly as far as I can see, it just doesn't exist. Exoto, obviously, they really do their research when they decide to take on a project, and of course, well, when they execute, and they executed real good this time around. It's absolutely spectacular. We can get the car dressed up again. Just want to show you the air snorkel here. You can see it is molded plastic, but it is there, and there are actually little pins on the bottom of it, front and rear, that slot into little holes on top of the engine, front and rear. So slot them in, and then of course it just goes on. It's just a plastic part, but it sits there pretty nicely, and again, the pins hold it in place. And then, of course, putting the topside bodywork back on, and really the only bodywork we can remove. Here's the underside of it. Unlike on the 14B, for example, there was some heat shielding on that. This one's just a matte black finish, but it's very nicely done. It's actually pretty weighty. The majority of the weight of the car is actually the car itself, but the bodywork weighs a few ounces, I must say, or a few dozen milligrams for my European friends. But there we go. Get that on as quick as you like, and then just like that, the car is all dressed up again. Beep incoming, and there you go. Really, again, like I said, no criticism whatsoever from my mouth onto this car. It is pretty much nigh on perfect. What you see is what you get, and you definitely get a lot because you definitely see a lot with a car like this. And of course, Exoto, they're exclusive, they're expensive, but every now and again you do find a gem, and this truly is one. I've not had to do anything on it. Everything is as you see it. It's absolutely perfect. Definitely one that all those years ago when I first became aware that they existed, it was one that I always wanted, one that I was very sure that I would never get, but there it is now. And what I really wanted to do here was just to show it to all of you, because again, I know that a lot of you would love to have one like this too, and here it is, and hopefully we can use this as a reference if those of you who are watching are Formula One model collectors, and you see something like this and you're wondering what it should look like. This is what it should look like. This is, as far as I can tell, an absolutely perfect example. And again, the history of the car, it's the first really successful semi-automatic car. It challenged for the championship. It was driven by Alain Prost. At the time, he was a three-time world champion. He later went on to win his fourth title with Williams in '93, but again, you have the provenance of who drove it. You have the provenance of the season in which it competed. It was ran up the rear by Ayrton Senna in the very famous Suzuka 1990 incident. It's a V12 car. It's among the first semi-auto cars, and of course it's a Ferrari Formula One car. So all of those things combined mean that it is a very good addition to any 1/18th scale model collection. And of course, if you're going to be collecting Formula One, if you can come across one like this, you must very strongly consider it, because again, as you've seen, at least as I hope you've seen, you've got quite the piece here. It's spectacularly executed. I really do not wish for anything else with this one. It does everything that it should do and not a thing more. It is that good. Absolutely brilliant. I do hope that all of you have enjoyed this one though, and I do thank you all very much for watching. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you all very, very much for your continued support of the channel, and of course, we will see you soon.